Hi, I'm Dr. Brendan Roach, and welcome to a virtual tour of the Holy Land. I'm very excited because we're going to have a look at Jesus and the money changers in the Temple of Jerusalem today. In today's journey, we're going to explore the area around the Temple Mount and see where Jesus encountered the Pharisees and the priests and where they got rich off the proceeds of the pilgrim. I hope you're going to learn something very exciting today. There's lots of new information, so hang around for a virtual tour. The oldest version of the Bible had a little palace where he could stop overnight. Whoever interprets the dream has incredible power. If you're going from Jerusalem to Jericho or vice versa, you stop somewhere here and rest overnight. Near the caves where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. This is actually a pagan type place. It's a very likely place where Peter preached his first sermon. Some very significant, important events happen at this location. Hi, I'm Dr. Brendan Roach, and you're here on a virtual tour of the Holy Land. And let's get straight into it and have a look at the area of the money changers in the Temple of Jerusalem. It's if you can see in the background little story, you can see the huge boulders and the rocks there. When I was studying archaeology and this park wasn't even opened, a group of leading archaeologists took me into the park, stood me on top of those rocks and took a photo, which I think was eventually published in a journal, just to give a sort of a little bit of an insight into how those rocks actually were. So let's have a look at the temple in the area of Jerusalem, and let's go back and have a look at our journey so far. So we started on Mount Nebo, the place of promise, and we continued on to Sodom, which was the place of righteousness. We crossed the Jordan River, which is very important for our lesson today, where we see the place of cleansing. Then we climbed from Jericho up the Wadi Kelt, and then we arrived at the Inn of the Good Samaritan. We found ourselves on the Mount of Olives, which was the place of fruitfulness. And we continued into Hezekiah's tunnel, which was the place of preparation, finding ourselves eventually at the Pool of Siloam, which was the place of washing. Now we're in Jerusalem, and we are about to enter into the temple itself. So let's go back and start to weave some of these things together. Hopefully you're following along. So last time with the Pool of Siloam, which we can see there in the red arrow on the Jerusalem temple model, walking up the way and the temple path as we make our way up along in between those bigger buildings, up the valley, up the path of the pilgrims that we talked about last week. And we can see the purple arrow at the top bringing us to the place in the corner of the temple. So the path of the pilgrims is winding its way up there, separating people from the clean and unclean. Those who have washed are still clean. So they're continuing on. So imagine this: come out of Hezekiah's tunnel, the water's flowing, the most pure water in Jerusalem. The people have gone and washed where the blind man was healed and his eyes were opened, but the Pharisees' eyes were not opened. And now they're going up to the path of the pilgrims. So these guys are pure, they are clean, and now they're starting to walk up into the very presence of God themselves. So we also see here, we can have a look at the Pool of Siloam, and we can see the location of the money changers just sort of out there on the southwest corner. Now, what's really important, I want to show you this map. You can see the temple there at the top of the page, top of the map. You can also see the wording there that says the royal portico. There's a couple of other things that I want to let you know about. There's a passage, there's a stairway, which is known in archaeology as Robinson's Arch, because all we have left of it is the arch coming out of the royal portico. And that's called Robinson's Arch, or the stairway that leads up there, which we'll see in some of the diagrams. But that stairway leads up to where people, like a viewing platform. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And you can see Barclay's Gate. And we have absolutely no evidence, but I have a strong belief that Jesus went in Barclays Gate and entered in from that particular point there. So that's our journey in Jerusalem so far. You can see here with some reconstruction diagrams, you can see the area of the stairways leading up to that red roofed area. Now, that red roofed area was what was known as Herod's portico, or the royal portico, where people who weren't believers could go up into and actually watch what was happening in the temple there itself. So that's one of the main entrances. As people are coming up the pathway, they walk into that area there. And then if they could head off, they can go to the temple, or they can continue on and go up even further into this area. So they're not entering into the temple areas, just Gentiles who are having a little bit of a sticky beak might be doing. So it's also, if we have a look at the front area here, we'll talk a little bit about that, and we'll mention that in another slide. So we see it here. We've got the more technical archaeological terms there. We've got Robinson's Arch continuing up into that place there, into the temple. We've got another gate which continues on, and then we've got a pathway that continues all the way along there. And in this diagram, it's called the Royal Stoa, and we can see the Holder Gates. Now, it's interesting. I always used to think that the Holder Gates was the place where Jesus probably went in and out of the temple. But in further study and looking at what this area is all about, I think this is the location that the priests came into. That there was mass mikvahs or cleansing pools like the Pool of Siloam that were found in this particular area. But when you look at the pathways and you look at the reconstructions, you can see that there really wasn't a direct pathway there. They could sort of veer off there at the last minute, but the more logical place for them to go in is in this corner around Robinson's Arch. So here's a sort of reconstruction of what it might look like, people coming up to worship, climbing up Robinson's Arch, climbing up the stairway at the end of the Pilgrims Pathway. And that's a nice little reconstruction for us to be able to imagine what it would look like as well. Here's another reconstruction showing us where Barclays Gate is. And you can see after Robinson's Arch, you continue on, and we'll show you this spot. And Barclays Gate is another place to enter. So there was up to, people aren't sure, maybe 10, 12, 13, 14 different entrances where people could come in to the temple. So people of different purposes, different rank, different status. So in this particular corner that we see here, whether it be Robinson's Arch or Barclays Gates, this is where the ordinary pilgrims, certainly the ones coming up from the Pool of Siloam, would be able to be entering into the temple after they've done their ritual cleansing and washing, and now they can enter into the temple there. Here's a nice little diagram showing the gateway, showing the staircase of Barclays Gate, and it's a nice little reconstruction there. And you can see the stairway goes up, and then there's a little lever there, and it goes up, and then an L-shaped stairway leading up into the actual Temple Mount itself. The reason why I prefer this entry is because you can see at the top there's a southwest corner of the temple. So this means people who are entering this point are going inside the Soreg, or a place where a barrier that Gentiles were not allowed to pass. So it seems logical to me that this would be the entrance that pilgrims would use, that being Jews, Israelites, priests, Levites would use this entrance rather than Robinson's Arch, which could also be used by basically tourists or Gentiles or God-fearers or other people who hadn't cleansed themselves properly in order to enter the temple. Remember, at this time, Jerusalem and the temple was under Roman rule and Roman guard. So there was a lot that they controlled, but there are areas which they didn't control. And one of those was the royal portico, where people, certainly Herod and others of his friends, could go and have a look and see what was actually in the temple. I mean, you can imagine the temple was world famous. People literally would come from all around the world and Rome to have a look at this temple and see at the practices that were being conducted therein. So now we move on to the what we see as the slide And this is the end of the Pilgrims Path. So remember, we talked about the Pilgrims Path from the Pool of Siloam, and you can see what you literally see here is that what was there in the time of Jesus. We've got the pavers that the pilgrims would have walked on, and the big pile of boulders that I talked about at the beginning of this lesson. These were from the destruction of the temple. So these are boulders that were, as the temple was being destroyed, were literally thrown over. And one day when we get to talk about the temple specific, we will talk about why those boulders ended up. We've got so much to do in this lesson, we can't get to that point. So check it out later when we have some teaching specifically on the temple, which will be very interesting and very exciting. So here's what it looks like today, looking back towards that corner of Robinson's Arch. And again, giving you another perspective from the end of the boulders there. And this is exactly what Jerusalem looks like today. You can go, you can visit there, and you can see exactly what we're seeing there in this photo. And you can see the remnants of what we're calling the Pilgrim's Pathway, which leads all the way from the Pool of Siloam, all the way along the western wall of the temple until we get to the far northern edge of the temple. It's just amazing, amazing, very exciting. So here's another image. And the reason why I'm showing you this was the foundation of Robinson's Arch. It was an important structural, but it was also a place where shops were. So it sort of is thought to be one of those places. We saw some shops as well at the Pool of Siloam. And you can imagine tens of thousands of pilgrims coming along, particularly at this time before Passover. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But this is potentially where one of those locations where the money changers or those other people would have been located. So right there at the entrance of the temple, so people could go there. So, sorry, going back to this slide, this is actually well known. This is archaeologically demonstrated that these are shops. So they've found some things there that demonstrate that those are actually shops. So when are we? So we're still around 30 AD in the time of Jesus, and we are right in the middle of the Passion Week. We are right in the middle of some really important gospel stories that's actually occurring and what's actually happening there. And we can see some really important events that are occurring at this particular point. So what happened here? We've gone now. Let's start to bring some of these elements together. So we've gone from the Jordan River, which is the place of cleansing. Okay, we think of John the Baptist, we think of baptism, but it's the place of cleansing. It's washing. So people are actually going in and they're making themselves pure, preparing themselves to be ready for God. Then they find themselves at the inn of the Good Samaritan. Remember the story of the Good Samaritan and the priests and the Levite who weren't willing to touch the dead body or something that might become potentially a dead body because they were worried about becoming unclean if they went anywhere near a dead body. And they find themselves, we go onto the Pool of Siloam, which is a place of washing, and now the pilgrim is ready to enter the temple. Now into the temple, the place of the money changers and the place of selling sacrifice, and the third one, which very often gets overlooked, the seat of power or the seat of Moses, or just very simply called in scripture, the seat. So it's very easy to miss that. And we're going to talk about why that's important and what happened what's happened of importance in that particular story. So we start off with the place of the money changers. So why did you even need money changers? So we see there in Exodus chapter 30, verse 13, it says, "This they shall give everyone who goes through the counting half a shekel according to the holy shekel." So you see, they had to give. It was a commandment of God that that each person had to actually give half a shekel. So who had to give that half shekel, and what was the actual half shekel about? So while we're talking about that, we've got some pictures of the half shekel, and I'll leave that up while I just explain who had to donate and who had to give. So this was all males who were over the age of 20. And it's all Israelites, all Hebrews, all Jews who are over the age of 20 and were male had to. Now, no one could give any more or any less. That's interesting. No one. So if you're poor, you still had to give a half shekel, and it was a silver half shekel. And if you were extremely wealthy, which there are a lot of extremely wealthy people in Jerusalem, in the priestly and the Pharisee class, they also only gave half a shekel. Now, the original purpose that this was collected for was to build the foundations of the columns in the temple. Now, the reason why that's there is so that every single person, every single man, every single family could be represented in the temple. And then, of course, once the temple was built, then there's no need for those foundations for the columns that were built out of silver to be used anymore. So that money then went into the temple treasury and was used for other purposes as went along. So every male over the age of 20 all had to give exactly the same amount, all had to be given once a year, and had to be given by all Jewish men, including priests and Levites. So there was no exemption for anybody. Everybody was treated exactly the same, which is, again, one of the few places, not one of the few places, but one of the places in Scripture that actually doesn't have a proportional amount when it comes to giving finances and money. Interestingly, it was also required of proselytes, so someone like Cornelius, or freed slaves were also obligated to give. Others could donate: women, Romans, people who were sympathetic to the Jewish cause, people who wanted to come and worship at the temple. But once they started giving, they had to continue to give. And it was actually viewed in quite a very strict manner that people would go around and collect. And if they didn't have the money, then these collectors of the money could literally take even their clothing, things that they were required to give. So we ask ourselves, so why did we actually need money changes? Well, the basic simple process is if we're traveling and we need to change money, we understand that. But what was actually occurring here, there might be smaller amounts or larger amounts. So you couldn't come and give a gold coin donation, not like our gold coins, solid gold coins. Solid gold coins, it had to be a half silver shekel. So they might have to change the money to go down. There might be people who had copper coins, like the story of the widow who gave the 2 mites, or the copper coins. So there would have to be several of those. So they don't have to change. So that would be in the basic idea. But there was also, at the time of Jesus, only the Tyrrhenian half shekel was acceptable. Now, you may have seen in the background my different books and my different things. One of the things I have here is a Tyrrhenian half shekel, genuine replica, authorized by the Israeli antiquity authorities, with the silver coming out of the Tyrrhenian mines. So this is as close as a replica as you can get. And let me just take this out of the box for you. And one of the things that I decided that I actually wanted to do, that I actually wanted to get a hold of. So here's the little, let's see if I can get this up nice and close into the camera for you. Let me take it out of the thing because I think it's making it a little bit shiny, the protective case and the protective cover, to give you an idea. You can see it there. Let me take it off and let me give you a nice big, let's take the PowerPoints off for the moment, and then we can do a really nice big, let's see if we can get it in focus. Doesn't want to focus. There we go. That is a Tyrrhenian half shekel. On the other side, you can get that little bit of an idea of the size of that. And that is being made from an authentic coin that was used as the mold, and they restamped it according to that. So that's pretty amazing, pretty cool, I reckon. And there's some ideas and there's some photos of it there. Now you see on the left where I've got Tyrrhenian shekel or half shekel. They're pretty much a similar design. They were used around 30 AD. And the reason why I put up the other one is that's got the Jewish symbols on it. So let's have a look. And one of the most obvious things that we see about the Tyrrhenian shekel, it's actually got the head of a person on it. And the other side, it's got an animal on it, which are two violations of things that should not be in the temple. Then in a later period, pre-70 AD, before the destruction of the temple, when the Jewish people had revolted against Rome, they then brought in their own coins, and these coins had Jewish symbology on it. You can see flowers, you can see symbols, you can see elements of the temple which are included in those. But remember, the story that we're talking about uses the Tyrrhenian half shekel, which is incredibly important for us to understand the story, because many people mistakenly believe that the Tyrrhenian half shekel did not have the images on it, which would be a violation of Jewish law not to have any graven images. And if you're not going to have any graven images, certainly don't take them into the temple. And that they must have been these other ones, which were the later temple shekels. So they weren't. Okay, that's important. A lot of people make that mistake. A lot of preachers make that mistake. So it is not. We're using the Tyrrhenian shekel. So that sort of says, so we ask ourselves the question, why the Tyrrhenian shekel? Now, the Tyrrhenian shekel was used because it had the highest silver content of any of the silver coins that were available at that time. Therefore, it was the most pure. Now, one of the things that they were obsessed about during the time of Jesus was this idea of ritual purity. And remember that silver and gold were made by God. Stone, silver, gold, made by God. So the idea was that this was incredibly pure, made by God, and therefore it had the greatest value. Now, so they were trying to put this up as a thing of purity, but what it meant, because it had a higher silver content, that the Tyrrhenian shekel was worth more money. It therefore had the greatest value. So in pursuit of purity, a superficial pursuit of purity, they were actually pursuing wealth, not purity. In pursuit of equality, they pursued profit, and pursuit of worship that actually created an environment of exploitation. So that's what was actually going on with the coins. They were actually then, as well as people making a small amount of money, maybe 10% off the trading of the coin, the greater value was that these coins had a higher silver content, and you could only do that. So they're making money off the transaction, and they were making money off the coins themselves. So they were, it's sort of like, you're required to give a US dollar rather than an Australian dollar or a Canadian dollar, or so that the actual value of the coin was worth a lot more. The second thing we see here is the place of selling of sacrifices. And there's been, you may have heard some teachings on this, that the animals could not have a mark on it. They couldn't have a blemish on it. So they had to be perfect animals, in the sense of you can't give a faulty or defective sacrifice to God. So you couldn't give your dodgy animals. You had to give your best. So there were people who would assess this. So what this led to, it actually led to a massive exploitation that would occur, because you wouldn't bring your own animal. Say even you're coming from Bethlehem or so let's say Nazareth. Bethlehem's probably close enough that you could do it. But if you're coming from Nazareth, if you're coming from Galilee, or even further afield, you're coming from Rome, or you're coming from Britain, it's impractical to bring a sacrifice with you. So you would buy your sacrifice there. But if you brought one from home, you'd also get yourself into a situation where it could be rejected. So you got this animal that you brought, which is maybe the best of your flock of a lamb or something like that, and suddenly it's rejected. What do? You have to sell that animal for meat, which is insignificant compared to what you would get for a sacrificial animal. How much? Well, there's a story by one of the rabbis in the historical accounts where he criticizes people in the temple because a pigeon was sold at 25 times the value. So a pigeon was a sacrifice for somebody who was very poor. Okay, so there was the ranking, not like the shekel, there was the ranking here. You could give a pigeon a very simple sacrifice so that you're giving a sacrifice to God. But if you bought a pigeon for food, it would cost $1. Let's just say as an example. If you bought a pigeon here in the place of selling of sacrifices, it would be $25. So just massive exploitation of worshippers that was actually occurring in the temple itself there. So remember, there was no other place to offer sacrifice. You couldn't go, well, I'm going to the temple down the road. I'll go up to Rome and offer a sacrifice. I'll go to Tel Dan and offer a sacrifice. This was the only place that a Jewish person could come and offer their sacrifices. So they were completely captured by this system of corruption that was actually occurring. Let's have a look at what the Bible says about this and the selling of sacrifices in particular about this story. Then Jesus went into Matthew 21, 12 to 17. Then Jesus went into the temple of God and drove out all those who bought and sold in the temple and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats, important, note that word, seats, of those who sold doves. You sort of think about, and I just thought for many, many years, they've got tables, they've got somewhere to sit, and they're just smashing everything, and things are flying everywhere, and seats got turned over. No, it means something a lot more than that. The seats of those who sold doves. And he said to them, it is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have turned it into a den of thieves. So let's have a look at the importance of the seat. It was a seat of power. It wasn't just a seat for someone to sit in. It was the entrance of the gate. So they had several gates, and each one of these gates had a seat. And that seat was for the person who would make rulings, who would make decisions, who would say whether you were allowed into that area of the temple or not. And this was a common practice in the temple. It was also a common practice in city gates. It was also a common practice in synagogues as well. It was the seat of the person in a synagogue or in a temple who represented God. Let me say that again. It was the seat of the person who represented God. I'm not sure. I'm a pilgrim. Is my sacrifice going to be okay? Who makes that assessment? Who makes the judgment? The person in the seat. So the seat that we have here is from the synagogue at Chorazin, and it's the only one that's been found to my knowledge, but it also gives us a really, really good idea of what's going on. It was then that the high priests and the Pharisees, once Jesus had come in, he had turned over the seat of power, over the seat of authority. It's not just some coins got scattered, and if you look at most of the story, someone will pick up the coins and run away and all that sort of stuff. It's not about they lost a little bit of money. It's because he challenged their seat of power. He challenged their seat of authority. So those persons who were given the responsibility of treating all equally, let's think about it. For all people to be treated equally, I am coming to give my worship. I am coming to give my annual sacrifice. I am coming to give so that the worship practices of the temple can go. No matter how rich, no matter how poor, I'm walking in and I'm giving my half silver shekel. And I'm coming in and I am also buying my pigeon. I'm also buying my dove that I am actually going to sacrifice. So I'm going to give my coin, which is a sacrifice for the running of the temple, and I'm going to give my pigeon so that I can be washed, so I can be cleansed, so I can give my offering as a personal sacrifice. There were many corporate sacrifices like the Passover, which was a corporate sacrifice. Many people giving sacrifice on behalf of a family, on behalf of the nation, and the priests would be doing all their things. But my pigeon was a personal sacrifice. So this is all leading up. So let's think about the context. We've got Lazarus, who's been raised from the dead. We've got the blind man who's been healed. We've got Jesus and people walking up, the pilgrims walking up with him into offering their sacrifice in the temple. They've come and they've brought their coin in. They've been exploited. They've come and they're buying a pigeon because they're poor and that's all they can afford to do as a sacrifice. And they're coming in to do that, and they are being exploited by the people who are in power to represent God. It's unbelievable. And you can see why Jesus got upset. He got upset because the people who were meant to be representing God were profiteering off worship. You want to get God upset? Profiteer off worship. I'm not talking about selling a t-shirt or doing something like that, selling a CD in church. I'm talking about you are profiteering off people who are coming to worship God in the temple. It would be like charging people to come into church and say, you cannot worship God anywhere else except this building here, and we are going to charge you for coming to worship God. This is the thing. Goes, okay, you are here meant to be protecting the pilgrims, meant to be protecting the people of God, and you sitting in this seat of importance are exploiting the people of God. So it's an amazing story. So what do we learn from this? Exploitation of the people of God is never tolerated by God. There will be a punishment. And the second lesson we learn is worship is pure and cannot be defiled by people. So we've got the high priests who are exploiting. We've got the Pharisees and the others who are sitting in these seats of privilege who are exploiting the people of God. But listen, worship cannot be defiled. Your personal worship of God, no matter what the circumstance, no matter what the situation, no matter about the high priest, no matter about the Pharisee, your worship is pure. Your sacrifice is pure. Your worship to God, your offering, your donation to God is pure, no matter what the person does with that sacrifice or that donation once it's been given, because it's given to God and cannot be defiled or corrupted by people. Third thing we notice is that in worship and sacrifice, we are all equal before God. And that's what I love about this half shekel donation. We all have a place in the temple. We all have a place in the presence of God. We all have an equal place in the presence of God. And it doesn't matter how poor or how wealthy you are, we all have exactly the same. There are no shortcuts. There are no favorites. There is no one who is of greater or of lesser value. So that wraps up our lesson for today. The money changes. When it comes to God, we are all equal in value and equal in sacrifice. I'm Dr. Brennan Roach, the founder of Acts Bible College, and this has been a virtual tour of the Holy Land. Thank you for watching, and be with us again at another time. The oldest version of the Bible had a little palace where he could stop overnight. Whoever interprets the dream has incredible power. If you're going from Jerusalem to Jericho or vice versa, you stop somewhere here and rest overnight. Near the caves where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. This is actually a pagan type place. It's a very likely place where Peter preached his first sermon. Some very significant, important events happen at this location.